Hi, and welcome to my September wrap-up. I finished 12 different books in the month of September. Only two of them were comics, so it was a lot of books, and a few of them were chonky boys. A lot of them were good. There were a lot of five-star reads this month, and I've had an amazing reading year. I have no idea how I'm gonna pick top books of the year. I wouldn't even be able to tell you what the top book of this month was because they were so good. We started off strong with Mona Awad. Look at the annotations. Look at the annotations. So this was my second book of Mona Awad's. I'd previously read Bunny, and I loved it. Bunny was a fantastic fever dream of insanity and dark academia. This, All's Well in comparison, is more toned down, but still has a little bit of dark academia vibes, and the main sort of shtick that this is around, it's a book with one foot in a Shakespeare play and one foot in the realities of chronic illness. And as someone who's been dealing with some chronic illness, some chronic pain over the past 6 months, a year, multiple years, depending on where we start counting, I had many annotations to make. I kept underlying stuff and writing things like ouchie, ouch, ouch, and just punch me in the face less next time, it'll hurt less. This book really, really spoke to me, in other words. I really enjoyed it. So we follow Miranda, who is a community college theater prof, and she has chronic pain issues ever since her stage accident that also caused her to have to give up acting. She used to be a Shakespearean stage actress, and now all she can do is put on the community college play. And this year she's determined to put on All's Well That Ends Well, which is a Shakespeare play. I don't know why I said Shakespeare in a funny way like that. It's a Shakespeare play, and I'd never heard of it. I knew the expression, and I think that's the only thing left of the play, because it's just not a popular one. And the kids in her class are like, no, we're putting on Macbeth. We don't want to put on All's Well That Ends Well. And she's like, no, we're not putting on Macbeth. And she's really annoyed by these kids. She's annoyed at how healthy they are and just how much she's struggling. And thankfully, things start to change when she meets three mysterious strangers in a bar who offer her a interesting drink. Double, boil in trouble, etc., etc. This was fantastic. I gave it 4 stars. I found so much of it relatable, especially in terms of talking about the frustrations of chronic pain and how when you first start experiencing pain, people are very sympathetic, but after a while they're like, you just like complaining all the time. You don't really want to help yourself. All those tropes were in here. All the annoying doctor's appointments where doctors are like, we really can't do anything else for you. This is just how you live now. And you're like, okay, I don't know if I can do that, but okay. This was great. The reason it didn't get 5 stars, quite frankly, is because I found it kind of went off the rails in the end. It did get us to question our sanity and question the narrator's sanity, but not in a way that was as interesting and as compelling as in Bunny. I couldn't help but compare it to Bunny. So this ended up getting a 4.5 stars rounded down. I particularly recommend it if you're someone who has walked the path of being sick and tired of being so sick and tired, and you love a little bit of subverted Shakespeare, because why not? And if you're a fan of women's wrongs / descents into madness. Who doesn't love a woman descending into madness? I hadn't never read All's Well That Ends Well, but I had read Macbeth, and I think that is actually kind of the perfect knowledge of Shakespeare to have when going into this. So I do recommend familiarizing yourself, at least with the plot of Macbeth, if you do plan on reading this, which you should, because it's very good. If you told me that one of my big summer reads of 2023 would literally be a hard sci-fi series about humans making first contact with alien races, and that it would be heavily on astrophysics, military tactics, social engineering, political mutiny, alternate history, I would have told you, listen, that's not my thing. That's not what I read. That's not what I read. I don't want to do that. And yet Cixin Liu has converted me. The third book in the 3-Body Problem series, or World's End, I forget the name of the trilogy, but Death's End was so good. It was so dazzling. Like the other 2 books, they reach this point towards the first third or middle of the book where I was like, this is incredible, I can't put this down. I listened to the entire series, including Death's End. The audiobook is 28 hours, and it didn't feel like it. It felt too short. It genuinely felt too short. What I absolutely loved about this sci-fi series is that there were mechanics that the author came up with that were really clever and explored in a fascinating way. Here, one of my favorite mechanics was that we had a human who needed to communicate some very important information about alien tech to another human in a way that the aliens would not pick up on the fact that he was communicating this tech. And he did it by telling fairy tales. And we got to hear these fairy tales, and I was so enthralled by them. And I was so enthralled in watching all the other humans trying to decipher them and figure out what is he actually trying to tell them about, like, all this alien tech, because he was basically being held hostage by the aliens. And I loved these fairy tales, and I loved the interpretations of these fairy tales. That was like the best part of the book. Amazing things happened in the first book, the second book, and this one. Nothing less. I loved this series. And, like, it has its shortcomings. It absolutely has its shortcomings. Some of the characters are kind of one-dimensional and really are just kind of like chess pieces that the author's moving around just to, like, make things happen. But that's not even, like, it's not a book about characterization. It's not a book about introspection. It's a book about the human race and how the human race interacts with space and time and the possibility of life on other planets. And just, it's written so deliciously, is the best way I can put it. It's delicious, it's accessible, it's intelligent, it makes you feel intelligent while reading it, which is very impressive. That's a very remarkable thing to do, is to make your reader feel very intelligent rather than very confused. That takes a lot of skill. So now, like, when people ask me, oh, you like sci-fi, what sci-fi series should I pick up? Whether they're readers or not, I am recommending this series to them. I'm like, have you heard of the three-body problem? Half the time they're like, yeah, people say it's good. I'm like, it's good. It's really good. It's really, really good. It's really accessible. Please read it. Because it's really good. And I loved it on audiobook. I absolutely adored it. So if you like the other books and you're like, I don't know if I should read the last one, it's a little thicker than the others, I don't have time, blah, 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 blah. No, read it. It explores the philosophy, the physics, the future of the human race. Like, I am giving this all the stars in the galaxy because this series and this book are just mind-blowing, amazing. I think I'm gonna become a hard sci-fi girly because of this series. Like, it might be what converts me back to hard sci-fi, something that I have not read a lot of as an adult, but I just love this so much. Yeah, I can't stop singing its praises. All the stars. All the stars. Filming these, like, reviews where I just sequentially talk about books I read and the order in which I finish them is always super weird, because sometimes I'll have to transition from a book that I was like, this was the best thing ever, into a book where I'm like, I wanted to like this and it just didn't work out, and I don't have a smooth transition for it. But that's what's happening here. That's what happened with Chain Gang All-Stars. I'm sorry. I am genuinely so disappointed, because I loved Friday Black, the author's short story collection that was published in January. I devoured it. I thought it was brilliant, and I was like, yes, a novel's coming out. I need to read it the moment it's published. And I almost DNF'd it. Like, there was just something about the concept of Chain Gang All-Stars and the execution of it that just didn't keep me... It just didn't hold my attention. I really liked the subplots and the side stories, so I didn't care for the two main characters in this book, which, if you don't know anything about it, it's in a alternate reality near future where prisoners in the American prison industrial complex can fight for their lives in this gladiator-style battle and be released rather than serving life sentences or death penalties. So in these gladiator battles, they go on until one of them dies. So they have to basically kill a bunch of people and not be killed in order to gain their freedom. And they become basically local celebrities, and there's a bit of, like, a personality cult around them. And the book is a commentary on the prison system and how we dehumanize prisoners It's a big commentary on who ends up in jail and for what reasons, a lot of discussion about race in America, all these kinds of things. Honestly, really fascinating topics, and the way that it was explored in the side plots. For instance, we followed some people who were watching the show. It's literally like a game show for the first time, and we're like kind of horrified and having mixed feelings about it. I enjoyed that. Or we followed some of the gladiators who weren't our main kind of two protagonists and got to see a little more of the world building. And I found that really fascinating and insightful and thought provoking. But the main story itself really didn't appeal to me. I think it's because everything was so high stakes all the time that eventually it just stopped being high stakes, if you understand what I mean. So, like, if everything is like life and death, then past a certain point, it's hard not to be like almost desensitized to it. And I think that's really unfortunate because I know this is an extremely skilled author. I absolutely adored the short stories. But if this had been a short story in Friday Black, it would have been one of my skips. Friday Black had some amazing stories, and I will be reading his next novel because this was like, I think he can do better. I think he can do better. I think the ideas were there, but I don't think it like worked for me. I feel like I would have liked it a lot more if we had a little more exploration of like characters in our lives and a little more exploration about like social repercussions and social reactions to the program. So I really liked the examples of people either being complacent or like endorsing the program versus people protesting against it and being horrified by it. I would have wanted just more of that. I feel like I didn't get enough as much as I wanted, and instead there was a lot of focus on describing the gladiator battles, describing the violence, and why everyone had these like weird nicknames, and why their weapons had nicknames and all about their weapons. Like, that was the stuff I didn't care about. I wanted the social commentary a little more. That said, if you want to read about like racism in the context of the American prison system and you don't mind having like a huge cast of characters, I think you should start with a short story collection, but this book will also satisfy that craving. And while it's not for me, I definitely see why other people like it. Other people have rated this very highly, so I think this might just be a me thing. The next book I finished was one that I'd been like, I knew that I was gonna really like it. I was really, really highly anticipating it. I knew that I was really gonna like it, so I was like waiting for a moment where I had a bit of a reading slump or like just needed something that I knew I would love. And that was the moment. And that's when I picked up The Light Pirate. And so I'd read this author's other novel, Good Morning Midnight, last year, and it blew me away. I think I actually talked about it in the first ever YouTube video I ever made, and part of the reason I started doing YouTube was because I was so excited about that book and had no one to talk to about it. So I was super excited for The Light Pirate, and this was a book that kept me up super late. It's divided into 4 parts, and the first part is quite long, and I could not stop reading it. It was like 3 a.m. I had work the next day. It was a problem. I could not stop reading it. She just writes about things like loss and grief and longing and stolen opportunities and love in such a beautiful way, and just she develops these great backstories for her characters and also turns it into climate fiction. And I love climate fiction. It's just a genre that's grown on me so much. And she really highlights the urgency of climate change. So in this story that's set in Florida, it's sort of like a small town prone to a lot of hurricanes. We follow a girl who is born during a hurricane. We actually start following her family when she's not born yet and her mother's heavily pregnant. And we get the play-by-play of what happens the day of that hurricane that she is also born and then named after. Imagine being named after a natural disaster. That's difficult. And it becomes very apparent because she is just like haunted by her namesake, and she's haunted by ghosts of people and actual people, and I love her so much. And then she's like emotionally adopted. When she's a child, she's emotionally adopted by the coolest character ever, who is Phyllis, who lives alone in her house and is a survivalist in the best ways. She was an ecologist and she takes samples from the plants and preserves all her own food and is very nonviolent and loves animals and just like, I want to be Phyllis when I grow up. Like, she has lone witch in the woods vibes. And I would like to do that. That sounds amazing. And she just takes Wanda in, takes care of her as the climate continues to degrade around them and as people keep leaving this community. Because people will evacuate when there's a weather warning and then just not come back. So we watch the community like dwindle. I love this book. I loved this book so much. It's absolutely gorgeous. If you like coming of age novels and you're interested in character-driven climate fiction, and you're okay with like a hefty dose of magic realism, because there is some magic realism in this, please read this. It's so good. It's so good. I need a copy. I need a copy because it's so beautiful. By mid-September, I'd read some really good books and some heavy books, so I was like, okay, I need a break. And I'd heard the title, Something is Killing the Children, and I'm like, that's an amazing title. Like the magpie I am, I'm like, I'm gonna go read that. That's a really cool title. It's very shiny. The problem is that the shiniest thing about the series really was the title. Like, there's nothing wrong with the graphic novel. I just didn't feel like it was bringing anything new to the table. Like, it was just very tropey, I guess. Like, the kids are not believed. There's a cool monster hunting girl named Erica Slaughter. The cops are useless, all that kind of stuff. And the art was cool, like the pacing was cool, the monster was fine, but it's not... I'm like a casual graphic novel enjoyer. I'm not someone who's really into like monsters and monster hunters or anything like that. So because there was nothing extra in here that like really kept my attention, I just decided I finished the volume, gave it 2 stars, and moved on. I don't think it's a series I'll be continuing. If something very interesting does happen and you've read this, let me know. Because, like, it wasn't bad. I just didn't find it had any oomph. I was hoping for a lot more oomph based on how cool the title was. One of my newest favorite authors is Yoko Ogawa. This was the 4th book I read of hers, and the thing is, all the books I've read of hers are very different. The first one was like literary fiction. It was The Memory Police. And then I read a short story collection of hers, Revenge, where like all the stories slot together like a really complex puzzle. And I've also read The Housekeeper and the Professor of hers, which is like so tender and emotional and beautiful and heartwarming. So just like, Yoko Ogawa has range. She has so much range, and I've enjoyed her in every genre so far, like speculative fiction, emotional, lit fic, and horror. This is, I'd say, emotional, lit fic, and horror, this particular collection. We follow 3 novellas, and all 3 can be summarized by saying that we're following a young woman who becomes somewhat obsessed about someone else's body or bodily functions, someone who isn't her, and this possession consumes her and gets expressed through a detached cruelty. Like a detached cruelty towards someone more vulnerable than her. And we don't know, because each of the 3 novellas is narrated and because each of the 3 novellas is narrated first person, we don't actually know if it's like the same character or not. It seems to not be. It seems to be a different name, but the vibes are very similar. So it's kind of like you're reading the same story 3 times in 3 contexts, following 3 women who may or may not be the same people. And it is creepy. There's a review on the back of the book that says that reading this book is like suddenly touching an icy hand in the night. Yeah. It's like everything's fine, and then you're like, wait, what? It was so unsettling. I didn't even understand necessarily what was so unsettling about what I read, but I was like, my skin crawled a little. So if you enjoy that kind of subtle fiction that does make your skin crawl and you're not really able to pinpoint why, And if you enjoy reading about like the grotesqueness of the human body, and you've read Yoko Ogawa in the past, tonally, I actually found these most similar to her horror short story collection, Revenge. I recommend this very highly. It's a weird read. It's a short, quick, but very weird read. And I gave it a solid 4 stars. Braiding Sweetgrass changed my mind about a lot of things. So, as many of you know, I've been trained as a scientist up through the PhD level. I've been trained to trust data and objectivity and focus on that as sort of the main method of acquiring knowledge. So, I've really struggled with understanding the validity and the importance of other ways of knowing, of non-quantitative ways of knowing. But I'm also a person, I would like to say, who has a loving heart. So it's like my heart kind of understands non-rational ways of knowing, but couldn't reconcile that. What's incredible about Braiding Sweetgrass is it's written by a professor of botany who is also an Indigenous woman who has connected very strongly with Indigenous traditions and ways of knowing. And it's the story of the world around her, the more than human world that encompasses animals, plants, fungi. And she really reconciles all those kind of different perspectives that we can take when trying to understand the world, and does so beautifully and in such an accessible fashion. She blew me away. What I loved about experiencing reading Braiding Sweetgrass was that I listened to it on audiobook and it was read by the author. And just she has the most beautiful literary voice and literal voice. It was amazing. Like, it just spoke to a part of me that really needed to be spoken to. And it was like these incoherent parts of me. It was like I had, I don't know, a dislocated joint, and this book just like put it back, like put my shoulder back in its socket, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is how it feels. This is like what wholeness feels like. Very high praises to give a book, but like something just clicked for me when I was reading this, and it really helped. It didn't negate anything from my formal education or from my scientific education, but rather it helped me put together different perspectives that I already held and different aspects of my life. It really created this very nice harmony in my head and in my heart. I'm just so grateful that this book finally found its way to me. Like, it really is as good as everyone else says it is. It is that good and better. Like, if you've struggled with sort of reconciling like your inner wonder for nature along with sort of a more intellectualized way of understanding it, if you feel like alienated from yourself, especially by living in a concrete jungle, which is something I struggle with a lot, having lived in cities my entire life, but enjoying nature so much. And like, if your heart craves that kind of nourishment, this is what you need. It's so good. It's so good. And there's these amazing conversations regarding climate change and capitalist economic structures. This book, along with others, has also really emphasized how much we live in a culture of artificial scarcity. So that sense of like, oh, I need more, I need this to be better, this isn't enough, when really we live on an amazing planet full of abundance, and beauty is extremely abundant, and we do have everything we actually need. And just like thinking of the world from a perspective of abundance has been very helpful to me, especially given that I am economically comfortable, I am surviving in the world, and that does come. Of course, that's a certain privilege in and of itself, but just that mind shift from, oh, but I'm missing this and I'm missing that and I'm missing that, to very genuine gratitude. I think this book really encourages that in a very beautiful way. So please read it. I'm just telling you to read a bunch of books today because they're so. September was mind-blowing. September was just a mind-blowing reading month. Like, the last one was a 5-star, and this is also a 5-star. This is the hour of the 5 stars. So I'd never read any Clarice Lispector before, and I have currently been on this little mission to read more Latin American literature because that is a continent I had just barely read from ever. So very mindfully, I was like, Clarice Lispector is a respected author. I should pick something up. This seems to be one of her most popular novellas. It's pretty short. Let's go. All I kind of knew about Clarice Lispector, and this isn't actual knowledge, it's Lispector rhymes with Hannibal Lecter. Clarice is a character in Silence of the Lambs. Nothing to do with this. But that was the only association I had at the time. But now I know better. And I read this book, and I literally, it's not even that I couldn't put it down, it didn't occur to me that putting it down was an option. This book is written, one person wrote a review saying that it was like the ravings of a lunatic that now and again just shine with absolute brilliance and crystalline truth. And I'm like, yes, that's what it is. Like, you have no idea what you're reading, and then you go, and then you have no idea what you're reading, and you go, and that was just my entire experience reading this book. I loved it. It's a man sits down to chronicle a story, and he tells you the life story of a woman who has a very, very tragic life. But the tone in which he tells it and the way in which he recounts events, it's gold. It's absolute gold. I really don't even know how else to encapsulate the experience of reading this novella. It's incredible. I want to read it again. I want to read it like 5 times. I can't wait to read more of Hannibal Lecter, Clarice Lispector's work. Because, wow. Drowning in 5 stars. And I love it. I have really enjoyed trying to write like witty one-liners when I write reviews for books on Goodreads. And this one, I had two. I had 2 for this one. One was the more serious. All happy families are alike, and all unhappy families could do with having David Sedaris write about them. Because David Sedaris is really funny, and pain plus time plus humor equals comedy. Alternatively, though, the tagline could have just been, all right, kids, the whiskey's kicking in. Let's listen to Uncle David tell his wild stories. Gather round. I knew nothing about David Sedaris other than the fact that he was a gay comedian. He's wonderful. And he introduces us to his whole family in this collection. We find out about his dead mother, his dead sister, his loving husband, his snarky father, all his other siblings. And it's basically a stand-up comedy show, but as a book. But if you listen to it on audio, it's basically just a stand-up comedy show. Like, I can't quite even call this a book. The audiobook is such a delight. It's read by David. It includes clips from some live readings, as well as a little bit of music. And if you're the kind of person who likes to laugh at tragedy, or who copes by laughing, and you enjoy rambling storytelling, which you might be that kind of person if you are still watching this video, and if you don't mind quite graphic descriptions of digestion and other such bodily functions, I really recommend this. And especially on audiobook, because like I said, it's barely a book, it's a comedy stand-up show. I was traveling listening to some David Sedaris, and really helped pass the time, I gotta say. This got a solid 4 stars for just making me chuckle. I was just kind of in the mood for famous people talking about other people dying in memoirs. So while David Sedaris just like laughs and laughs, Joan Didion. Whoa. This was an ouchie, ouch, ouch, ouch kind of book. The Year of Magical Thinking is a book about grief, where Joan Didion watches her daughter struggle with an extreme illness and teeter on the brink of life and death. And while this is happening, her husband suddenly dies of a massive coronary, aka a heart attack. So she tries to deal with this, and it's a really fascinating voice because Joan Didion is incredibly like famous and privileged, rich New Yorker. She's like, ah yes, then the driver took me here and we stayed at the Ritz Hotel, and like that's the vibe. But she also writes about the universality of pain and grief in ways that are like just like punch you in the gut. Like, this was my first Didion, and it really makes me want to read more of her stuff. Because just like the sentence construction and the way she was talking about grief and the way she talked about the changes in routine and the way she described mundane but painful experiences with this like crystalline language. I was so into it. I was so into it. This got a solid 4 stars from me. One of the things that I really appreciated, this was also something I listened to on audiobook, is there was really nice music in the transitions between chapters of the audiobook. And this should have been narrated by Catherine O'Hare because Joan Didion in this book, at the very least, really sounds like Moira Rose from Schitt's Creek. And you empathize with her in the same kind of way. This might just be me, but just like I really kept picturing Moira Rose the entire time I was reading this, but it made me like sad and thinking about grief a lot and thinking about how we grow around grief and all the magical thinking we do when our life is falling apart and all the things about life that we can't control and what losing someone feels like and what the fear of losing someone feels like. It was great. It was great. I love me a sad autobiography. So yeah, 4 stars. I recommend it. After reading like autobiographies about people talking about death and grief and all that kind of stuff, and just a very heavy very, very heavy books I've been reading, I was like, you know what? I need a cute graphic novel. So I picked up the 2nd volume of the Tea Dragon Society, which was the Tea Dragon Festival. I think my heart was too cold. This didn't give me any warm and fuzzies, and I was really disappointed about that because I really liked the first book. But this one, like, okay, what I really liked about the first book was that the characters were compelling, but also we got to hang out with the tea dragons. And the tea dragons are these tiny little dragons where tea leaves grow out of their heads, like where like horns and scales would be. So each tea dragon is like a flavor of tea, and they're cute, and they like bond with their human, and it gave me cat vibes, and I loved it. Here, they're kind of like side characters, and instead we're following a literal dragon who is a slightly different species and who accidentally fell asleep for 80 years and is now very confused and will be taken care of by our protagonist. It's a children's novel, so there isn't like too much complexity to the plot or too much that happens, and like it's very sweet. You have a human being taking care of a dragon, adorable, very wholesome. A few characters from the first graphic novel come in, but it just didn't. I went into it with very high expectations because I liked the first one so much, so this ended up as a 2.5 stars, rounded down, which was so disappointing. But I was like, oh, I wanted more tea dragons. This is called the Tea Dragon Festival. Where are my little tea dragons? Why are they just in the background? Let me know if the 3rd one is good. Should I bother with the 3rd one, or will I be disappointed? I'm very picky. I'm honestly very picky and critical, and that's a problem when I'm like going towards children's lit, because like I'm disappointed 9 times out of 10. But the 1 time out of 10 that I'm not, I'm like the Grinch and my heart grows 3 sizes. So it's a trade-off. It's funny how my last like 2 books of September were probably the worst ones I read, but they weren't bad. Like I wouldn't say that the Tea Dragon Festival was a bad book. It just didn't resonate with me personally. And similarly, The Shame by Makenna Goodman wasn't bad. I forget when this was recommended to me. I feel like years ago, and this was a book I just couldn't find, and I finally found a copy at the library. And it's a short little novella where we follow Alma, who is living someone's version of a best life, taking care of her kids in rural Vermont, essentially homesteading, while her professor husband works on his career and tells her that when the kids are older, she can start working on her career, you know, the usual. And she doesn't know if this is the life she wants. And we just sort of go through a series of nothing happens, and Alma keeps reflecting, and we're living in her head, and we're coping with the overwhelming mundanity of her life, of her idyllic, comfortable life, but of her life. And it's a lot of no plot, just vibes. The only real plot element that happens is that she becomes obsessed with a woman online who's essentially like a health influencer. Very obsessed. if you catch my drift. Because she just sees this one woman and other women in general just being so much better at this whole homesteading mother-wife thing than she is. So I do recommend this if you enjoy reading like a 100-page novella about the angst of motherhood and having basically nothing happen. I gave this a 3-star. Like, it was an interesting experience, but I feel like I've seen the themes explored in better ways in the past. It was just fine. It was just fine. And like, that's a really disappointing way to wrap up September, because frankly, most of my September was incredible. But yeah, I just had so many 5-star reads in September. Like, 4 out of the 12 books that I read were 5 stars, and I try to be really stingy with my 5 stars because 5 stars is the most I can give. That means this book, like, changed me as a person. And the thing is, Death's End, The Light Pirate, Braiding Sweetgrass, and The Hour of the Star, like, they all did that. They all changed me as a person. So September was amazing. Which of these was the best? I can't even tell you. They were, like, really good in different ways. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not looking forward to making my best of 2023 video because I don't know. It's a very good problem to have. I love reading so many good books and I love talking to you about them. So as always, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for watching. I hope you have an amazing day and read some books that change you as a person and that just feel really, really good. Okay, bye.